Three rentals, 3 years of hustle, $108,000 in passive income by age 67, and over $3.7 million in wealth. In this case study, I'll show you how a couple used one short sprint in their early 30s to have 30 years of flexibility and freedom. No flipping, no empires, just a simple, repeatable path. Hey there, if we haven't met yet, my name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson. And in this show and this YouTube channel, I teach you how to use real estate investing to achieve financial freedom so you can spend your time doing more of what matters. So I want to tell you a story or a case study about a couple who earns $180,000 per year, but they heard an episode that I had not too long ago about a concept called Coast Financial Independence, CoastFi. And it's an alternative to the traditional idea of retiring early, where instead of like pushing really hard for 10 or 15 years and kind of grinding it out during the best years of your life, they're in their early 30s. Instead, they might work really hard for a few years to build up a nest egg and then coast for many decades and let that nest egg grow into a much bigger nest egg that could support them in retirement. So the idea is, hey, I'm going to work at this job that I don't really love right now. Like they both have good careers, but it's not that inspiring. If they could wave their magic wand, one of them might be coaching high school sports and teaching high school, teaching financial literacy to high school students, doing something that's really, matters to him and is really inspiring. She has some creative outlets and some nonprofits that she really wants to work in. And they could both do these things and they would just make a lot less money. They feel like it would sacrifice their future if they did that. And so could they have a plan to work intensely for a few years in order to then be able to make that switch, even if they make less money, and not worry about it because their future is taken care of financially? Let's see if we can put that together. So during those few years, they're living very frugally, saving a lot of money. They own their own home, but it's a simple home. And because they're living frugally, they can save about $90,000 per year to invest in their real estate. They also have a home equity line of credit, and they're able to scrounge up some money to buy a piece of land. So they're in my rental property mastery. They've learned how you can find and go out and find interesting properties that have the ability to change something and make a little bit more money with it. And in particular, they noticed a deal very similar to one I just bought, actually. So these numbers are very real. I recognize all these numbers. They bought a piece of land that had an old house on it, and it was kind of like a double lot, had some extra land on it. But they studied their zoning and they realized that if they applied with the city, they could actually get 3 lots out of these what looked like 2 lots. So that was the value add. That's how they unlocked some value in that. And they realized this old house it needed so much work, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They decided just to tear the house down and subdivide the 3 lots and then build 3 new houses on it. They were going to build 3 new rentals that they were going to keep, and that was going to be their kind of long-term rental plan. So they had about $210,000 in buying the land and tearing the house down. They had to borrow some private money to do that and just pay some interest on it in the meantime. But they were able to scrounge up the money between their cash and their private money to get the property bought. And then they went and got some construction loans one at a time to build each one of these houses. So it took them a few years to do it. And of course, there's some moving pieces to get the money, but I promise you, because this is something I'm doing at the moment, if you buy the right property with the right value, and in this case, these houses when they're fixed up would be worth about $350,000, and their total cost all in, including the land and the construction cost and the soft cost of applying and doing all the permits, was about $280,000. So that's about 80% of the value of the property. So they've got some equity in there, not like a home run, but pretty solid deal for new construction houses that they can build and then hold as rentals later on. And the long and short of it is, once each of these houses was built, they got a permanent $190,000 loan because they had good jobs and good credit, conventional loans on the property. They refinanced it, and then they did it again and built a second house, and did it again, built a third house. So at the end of 3 years, they have 3 new construction rentals that they can then hold, and I'll show you what happens next. The first thing you need to know is that the rent on these properties, when they rented all 3 out, did not look that exciting on the front end. In fact, when they told some of their investor friends about it, and they showed them that they were going to make $0 in cash flow to start out on these 3 properties, they told them they were crazy. They're like, that's not a good deal. You can't do deals anymore. Properties don't cash flow. But again, they had some patience and they had some vision with this. They understood that there's different types of properties. This is a high quality property in a good neighborhood that had high demand. It was new construction, and things are going to get a little bit better. This is like planting a seed. They had to plant a seed in the ground, and this fruit tree was not going to grow and really bear fruit for maybe 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line. But because they were at least able to pay all of their expenses, they had $2,000 a month in rent coming in on this new construction property. They got good, high quality, long-term tenants. They had $800 in maintenance, management, capital expense savings, things like that over the long run. Everything except for their mortgage cost them $800 a month. So they had $1,200 per month left over, and what's called NOI, or net operating income. And that happened to be about the same amount as the amount of money they borrowed. They had a $190,000 mortgage at 6.5% for 30 years. But here's the key: that loan was fixed, that payment was fixed, that interest rate was fixed for the next 30 years. So their plan, their hope, was that things would get better over time and that fruit tree would start to blossom. So let me show you what that might look like over time. So initially, their investor friends were right. In year one and in the early days of this investment, this was not a home run from a cash flow standpoint. They weren't planning on spending any of the money, but they weren't making a lot of excess money. But over time, and this is the assumption they made and what they actually found happened, very similar to what I found happened with my own properties over the last 22 years, is that if you choose good locations, which is one of the most important parts of real estate investing, places where jobs are growing, where population's increasing, and you can buy a property that barely works or at least works and makes some cash flow today, the plan on this kind of property over time is for that rent to grow. And because your mortgage is fixed at the same interest rate, the same payment, that as the rent grows, and as long as they grow about the same pace as what your other operating expenses grow, your cash flow will grow much more over time. So what starts off as like a trickle of cash flow, as you can see in this graph, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And after 15 years, 20 years, they're making $32,000 per year in cash flow. So about $3,000 per month. And they still have the same mortgage payment. And then they continue holding. And after 30 years or 33 years from the time they started, they pay off their mortgages. See this big jump: pay off mortgage number one, pay off mortgage number two, pay off mortgage number three. And in the end, they're making $108,000 per year in cash flow at the time they're 67 years old and they want to retire. And if you total up this trickle of cash flow, which started really small and got bigger and bigger over time, the total amount of money they would have collected over that entire period of time was over $1 million in cash flow from a property that started with $0 in cash flow. But you might remember that cash flow is not the only way you make money in real estate investing. Remember, they bought these properties that they had $280,000 in, they put $90,000 down, had a $190,000 loan, but they start off being worth $350,000 a piece. And let's assume that those properties also grew in value by about 3% per year over those 30 plus years that they own the properties. And so first of all, they pay those loans off. It's a 30-year amortization. So after 30 years, each of those loans is paid off. So they don't owe any money on those properties anymore. And then these properties grow, each one to about $850,000 plus or minus. You don't know exactly what it'll be like, but if it grew at 3% per year, it's around that number. So you have three houses now with no debt, and they're still continuing to be rented, that are worth $850,000 a piece, or over $2.5 million total. Numbers and properties are great, but what really matters about the numbers and the properties is what it can do for your life. That's the reason this couple invested in real estate in the first place. So let's talk about how that might have changed their life during years 4 to 30, because they worked intensely, remember, and they saved a bunch of money, lived frugally for years 1 through 3. But in year 4, they decided that, you know what? I think we're okay. We've got these seeds planted. We used our credit to buy these properties. We saved up a bunch of money. We're now going to quit the bad jobs, the ones we don't like, and we're going to take on passion jobs. And maybe they still make money, right? But do they pay teachers enough in our country? No, they don't pay them that much. They make a lot less money being teachers, but they love these jobs. They're passionate about them, working for a nonprofit or working for something else with a better schedule, maybe taking some time off if they want to have kids, and working part-time. Whatever they dream up, they can do that without finances, at least maximizing their finances being the number one criteria. And as a result, they can focus more on their health, their physical health, their relationship health, the health of their community. They can focus on more of the things that make them happy and not defer that until someday when you retire. And so years 4 to 30 are kind of like a new beginning for them. They can choose what they want to do because of some of the work they've done on the front end. And on the back end, when they turn 67, a lot of people worry about retirement, understandably. If you look at the stats on when people retire, how much money people actually have saved, and it's pretty scary. People have to keep working, or they have to worry about how they're going to pay for things when they're in retirement. And in this case, let's just assume this couple, I looked up some Social Security numbers for myself and other people. Let's assume that by the time they are 67, they can draw each about $2,000 per month in Social Security. That's what it was when I looked at some of my numbers. Just some similar salaries to what they were making with a calculator. That's about what they might make, $48,000 per year. not too bad, right? But that's 30 years from now. So there's gonna be a lot of inflation. It's not gonna buy the same amount of things you could buy today. But because they have these three little rental properties, they're gonna make double what they were with the Social Security just from those three rental properties that they bought 30 years ago. And then maybe they also saved up some money in a 401k through the different jobs they worked over the years. Maybe that accumulated over time, and maybe they can draw some money from that as well. But it's possible between Social Security, their three rentals, and then maybe some 401k money, they could draw almost a couple $100,000 per year in cash flow, with over 50% of that being from their rental properties. They can have a steady supply of money to pay for their retirement because of this intense period they worked in their 30s. I mentioned they have $2.5 million in rental property equity. Maybe they have $1 million in their 401k that they've accumulated over the years in stocks and index funds, things like that. Their home that they originally bought and lived in, they paid that off too, and now that's worth $1 million or so. So they have $4 or $5 million worth of wealth, not counting all the cash flow. I didn't even put that in the equation because I assumed that cash flow over the years, maybe they spent that for their vacations. Maybe they put it back into the properties. That's some extra money that they also had. But the point is, they're in pretty good shape at 67 years old. So I don't know the specific numbers or the details of this case study are exactly like yours, but I can tell you there's three takeaways that I hope you leave this episode with. Number one, just like this couple, I don't believe in deferring life. A lot of people complain about real estate investing or financial independence as a way to, you're putting off your happiness. You're deferring your happiness until someday in the future when you retire, then things are going to be better. I don't think you have to do it that way. Between this kind of idea of CoastFi, where you could build up a nest egg and then let it, pay for you later, or using mini retirements, a lot of the things I talk about on this channel, you don't have to defer life. In fact, it's not a good strategy. You can enjoy your life and invest for the future, especially with a small and mighty style, which is my third takeaway here. If you don't necessarily continue growing and make growth and maximizing growth the only thing you're going for, you actually start with the life you want to live. You can have a small and mighty portfolio. Just three properties in this example can produce a lot of cash flow, can produce a lot of wealth for yourself, and keep things really, really simple. So if that's what your ambitions are, if you don't have the ambition of owning 1,000 units or 500 units, that's just fine. There's a place within real estate investing for everybody. Small Mighty is the name of the book I wrote, Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor. So if you like this model, it can definitely work for you. And then my second one, I'm going to skip back to that, is there's a power over time in compounding. And the growth that happens if you plant some seeds and let these things grow year after year after year, those seeds can become really big fruit trees that pay you a lot of money over time and give you a lot of freedom and a lot of flexibility. So the lesson there is you got to start. You can't wait. Even if you are in your 50s or your 60s, there's still time to compound, but you can't wait. You got to do it. And it's never going to be a perfect time. You're never going to know all of the information you need to know. You get a good strategy, you build your foundation, you avoid the biggest problems, and then you just get started. You plant those seeds, you buy those properties. And that's what this couple did. They didn't defer life. They compounded over time. They did it in a small, mighty way, and it really paid off for them in the end. So I hope these lessons are helpful for you. If you want a copy of my notes from all of this, all the whiteboard notes, kind of a cheat sheet of everything I went over today, go to coachcarson.com/3-rentals, and I'll have a link to that in the podcast and YouTube description below. You can get a copy of the notes, download that for free to kind of follow along with these numbers and review those numbers. And if you like this concept of coast financial independence, I want to recommend my next video, which is this full interview I did with Corey Fisk, where he and his wife stopped saving money and still hit financial independence. So this is a real life example of what I'm talking about here. And we have a conversation about why coast financial independence is so interesting, the details, how it made a big difference in their lives. So check the interview out. I think it'll really inspire you on the reason why this is a powerful concept. If you want to apply this with real estate investing like you did in this episode, that interview will show you a lot of details about how it's affected their life. You can look at the thumbnail and click on that above me here if you're watching on YouTube, or you can click on the link to the episode in the podcast or the YouTube description below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.